The video games industry is one of the most innovative and fastest growing industries in the world. The men and women of this industry work tirelessly to provide entertainment for the masses, and some of these provide the music. Music that we love. Music that we listen to when we're enjoying ourselves playing those video games. Video games. Music that we love. Music that we listen to when we're enjoying ourselves listening to video games. Video games. Do we even know who these people are? No. Would video games be the same without them? No. What you're about to hear are not real songs, but they are inspired by songs from video games. Video games. They are not covers of the songs themselves, but are together a testament to the variety and quality of this glorious industry. Let's not let this industry die. No, let's keep it alive by celebrating the music that we love the most. And let's go even further, by supporting others with the money we raise through our love of the music. Listen, enjoy, give, support.
Hello and welcome everybody to a very special episode here on IGM. We are interviewing a really cool dude named Simon David, who is doing a charity album. If you want to introduce yourself, Simon.
Hey, I'm Simon David, composer of the NotAGame Collection.
Yeah, so I just wanted to start this off really quickly. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what interested you in video game music?
Okay, so I am Simon David. I'm a school teacher actually by trade, but I have been doing music for about 15 years. Started when I was 12 at school, learnt music tech there, and been using Cubase ever since really to do all kinds of different things. And pretty recently just decided to get into video games music production.
Oh, cool. So what exactly is this album for? Like, I know it's supposed to be for Child's Play. So can you explain exactly what Child's Play is and like what makes it important to you?
All right, so Child's Play, for anybody who doesn't know, is a charity. It works with children who've been hospitalised, or children that are not having a great time, not very well, and it provides them with entertainment, whether that's through games, whether it's through toys or books, and it does a lot of good work all across the world to help children to feel that bit better. Why is it important to me? I guess because it's something that's very, very widely supported by the gaming community on the whole. I think I know, for example, the Humble Bundle quite famously supports them. Quite a lot of charity projects coming out now helping Child's Play. I think it's one of those things where we feel games are very therapeutic for us. We think games are very important to us, and we kind of want to share that with people in their hour of need too, I suppose.
Definitely. I know I originally was introduced to it by like Penny Arcade and Extra Credits, and it's a great charity. I love being behind it. So what exactly, like, why did you want to make an album to support it? Is it just you like making albums in general and you just thought this would be a good way to do that, or?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I did want to get into music production anyway. In terms of video game music, it's something that I've always really enjoyed, and something that I had a lot of other video game music, and I've been producing kind of similar stuff anyway, and I thought it's something that I could try and turn my hand to and have a go at with some amount of success, and I just really enjoyed doing that. And so I thought, if I'm going to sell an album, I may as well put some of that towards Child's Play and try and help them out a little bit too.
Yeah, that's great. So, sorry. The first track that I'd like to play from the album is inspired by Rogue Legacy, and it's called Spell Sword. But before I do, can you tell us a little bit about what exactly inspired you while you were making it?
So, as I said to you earlier, Spell Sword is one of the latest tracks on there. It's actually the last track I made for it. It's inspired by Rogue Legacy, which is a game I got into only really quite recently. So well into the production of the album. I got into Rogue Legacy. I had about 4 days when I just played it basically non-stop without eating or sleeping, and I just really loved the music for it, and it was just really fresh and original and quite kind of like strangely acoustic as well. Like it's got a lot of acoustic sounds. Like in that main track, people will hear like bottles cracking and things falling off benches. That's at least what it sounds like, and I just really appreciated that and quite like the simplicity of it and wanted to make something similar.
Oh, cool. Okay, we'll start that one up. So that was Spell Sword. Again, that was inspired by Rogue Legacy. You said you made this on Cubase?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with Cubase, like I said, for years and years. I think everyone has their own workstation that they use. I know a lot of people use Logic as well. A lot of people using Pro Tools, things like that. You know, they all vary in what they do. I think people always tend to like the one that they use the most. And you know, I've just grown up on Cubase. I can't imagine doing anything any other way. I think everyone's got their favorites. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. That's when I was in school, I had to do Pro Tools and Logic, and I think the same way. I talk to other people in the industry, that kind of thing, and they've got their own styles or their own programs that they love for their own certain reasons, but it's really what you grew up with.
Yeah, totally. And there's one or two that, like, I think the tracks go down the page instead of across the page. Like, I couldn't get behind that. That's great. That's completely nuts to me. How things go down the page. You go ahead. It's nuts.
Definitely. The next track I wanted to play is called Journey. It was inspired by Fez, which is actually one of my absolute favorite games by a Canadian developer. I love it mostly because in a world of video games where violence seems to be a huge thing, Fez, they try to make this huge, engaging video game that was really just about exploration at your own pace and very, very calm. So would you be able to tell us a little bit about like the journey that you had through Fez and how it drove you to make the song?
Well, I mean, Fez was it's a weird experience, Fez, isn't it? Because it's not a game that you really feel like you're playing. It is something that you get completely lost in, and that's something that is very much reflected in the music. You know, musically it's very, very big. It's got this massive, great big reverb to create a lot of space and a lot of presence, and it is quite dreamy in the way it's put together. And when you're playing it, you do kind of feel like you're dreaming a little bit, and all of the music, if you listen to it on its own as well, it just kind of reinforces this kind of dream trance state you're in. And I think that's probably most people's journey through Fez, is hearing these kind of incredible soundscapes coming through. And this is by originally Disaster Piece, who did an amazing job with the original soundtrack. I must give him a mention because he's fantastic. But yeah, this is my kind of tribute to him and the good work he's done, and of course the fantastic game that we got from it.
So this is Journey. So that really did perfectly reflect my own personal playthrough of Fez. Each of these songs really reminds me of the games that you're... So one of the interesting things I'm finding is the price point for this, is that you're releasing this entire album for a minimum donation of £5.
Sure.
So, like, what made you want to set such a low price for such high-quality music?
I mean, it's a few things, really. I mean, first of all, you know, this is my first album in the industry. I'm not somebody who's established in the same way a lot of the more established video games artists are. I mean, to me, the most important thing was to get people buying it, to get people listening to it, because, you know, the more people can buy it as possible, then ultimately the more money we can raise. And I think sometimes people do get put off by the bigger price tags, especially when they haven't heard of something before. You know, I mean, the price point isn't hugely important to me personally. It's more from a point of view of what's going to help to raise the most, really, for Child's Play, and what's going to get the most people to hear the music. Because, you know, I spend a lot of time on the music. I want people to hear it, and I think if you price it too high, then people ultimately can't benefit from it so much.
That's very true. And I'm just going to link, if you guys would like the album for yourselves, the link is right there.
Please do.
So how long did it take you actually to produce this album when it has so many different styles and genres in it?
I mean, it probably took me the best part of 8-9 months. maybe a little longer. Obviously that kind of time is still going on. I'm spending quite a lot of time telling people about it and talking to press and media as far as I can about it. So the work continues. But in terms of actually composing it, probably about 8 or 9 months off and on. Obviously that's in my free time, and I don't have that much as a teacher, so it did consume my life for a few months. Bless my fiance had to put up with me spending all hours up till the wee hours composing music and making a lot of noise in the house. So thanks to her for that too.
Yeah. Definitely. So the next one I want to play, Blunder Pressure, was instantly recognizable for me. I didn't even have to check the link to see what game it was inspired by.
It took me a long time to come up with a good pun-based title. Because if you look at all the rest of the songs on the album, they've all got really good pun-based titles, so it took me a long time.
So do you want to explain exactly what this one was inspired by?
Yeah, this was inspired by just an absolutely hilarious game. If you've never played it before, Surgeon Simulator 2013 is just the most amazing experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I managed to play this at a convention as well I went to when they were using the Oculus Rift, and it looked even better on there. I didn't get to go, sadly. But if you don't know it, it's basically a game where you play a surgeon and you just see his hand and moving his hand and doing these delicate procedures with the most sort of intentionally horrifically difficult controls. It just makes it an absolute pleasure, and it's got this really amazing over the top, completely in your face, completely bombastic sort of 80s hospital drama kind of music, which is just amazing. And I was just, as soon as I heard it, I was like, I desperately want to make a song that conveys the same sort of unnecessary drama as that music does. So that's kind of where it came from originally.
Yeah, definitely. So this one is Blunder Pressure. Perfectly perfectly capturing Surgeon Simulator. Oh, that's excellent.
It's over the top, isn't it? But it took me a long time to get those drums right as well. You've got to get just the right amount of over the top reverb on those drums.
Definitely. So is this all done like in the program with the MIDI controller, or are some of the sounds that you use recorded?
So, I mean, almost all of it is MIDI. I got to the point a little while ago where I started to get, and some people hate me for saying this, but I kind of got a bit fed up with audio. It's just not quite as flexible when you're doing this kind of thing. But yeah, there are some recorded songs. For example, in Whispers on the Wind, which is the next track, there's a recorded guitar because fake guitars, acoustic guitars, actually aren't that great. But to be honest, even a lot of the orchestral ones, they're using fake instruments. I've got some VSTs, downloads, things like that I've spent some money on, and to be honest, some of the sounds that come out of that are so good you wouldn't notice the difference. I mean, it beats getting a full orchestra in my tiny room here, so it seems the thing to do.
That's actually, I know, when doing a lot of video game music, you'll have your lead instrument as being naturally recorded, so like a lead violin or something like that, and then you'll have the tracks behind it to back it up being not recorded.
And you know, I've got some. I mean, a lot of the background stuff is drums and synths and basses, and to be honest, a lot of that stuff's electronic anyway, and it suits the genre. It's only a few tracks on the album, really, like I suppose Infamy HQ, Brightest Light at the end, where that kind of more acoustic sound comes through. But even though there aren't a lot of real instruments in there, I think it still sounds passable.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of Whispers on the Wind, then, do you want to tell us exactly how you made it and what inspired you?
Well, Whispers on the Wind is inspired by, I think, what is a lot of people's favourite indie game recently and favourite soundtrack. It's got the most amazing soundtrack by Darren Korb of Supergiant Games, and it's inspired by Bastion, which is, as you know, a kind of frontier-based, slightly dreamy game again. I actually looked at an interview with Darren Korb a while ago, and he defined his style as, now what was it? I think it was acoustic frontier trip hop or something really crazy like that, which was a bit of a challenge to meet up, but I kind of get where he's going. It's kind of about funky beats with kind of some western sounding instruments, and yeah, that was a really fun one to make. Quite a hard one to get right because it needed to sound kind of acoustic but also kind of not acoustic. It was a bit tricky to get right, but yeah, it's a good song in the end. I'm really pleased with the result.
Definitely, and that style is got to be difficult to try and master.
Super hard to reproduce.
Yeah.
It was such a good album as well. And actually, the album itself is, if you listen to the album of Bastion, and you must, because it's an amazing example of some really good modern video games music. The styles on there, the variety of the stuff on there is enormous as well, and it goes from like really funky kind of beats to really smooth stuff. There's some amazing vocal work on there as well. So to get something which encapsulated even a bit of that was a huge challenge. And you know, even this can't hope to reproduce the whole album, which is, as I say, well worth a listen.
So this is Whispers on the Wind, which was inspired by Bastion. Yeah. Again, you perfectly caught the style of Bastion with that one.
Oh, I don't know. That one's, as I say, it's a hard one to get the style of there because there's just such a range on the original album. But yeah, it's got a nice vibe to it in the end. That one.
Definitely. If we can elaborate with the chat that's going on in the stream, what kind of
Sure.
electric acoustic were you using?
Do you know? I think it's a Yamaha. Let's have a look. No, no, it's a Fender. I don't. That how bad is that? I don't even know what my guitar is. Fender. That's how little I use acoustic guitars these days. No, it's a Fender, and to be honest, I'm not a guitarist. Anyone will tell you I'm not a guitarist at all. So it took me quite a few takes to get it, in time in rhythm. But again, I mean, if you listen carefully, there are bits there where the guitar's slightly out of rhythm, slightly out of sync, and because it's not MIDI, I found it a little bit harder to just keep everything really tight. Because again, it's quite a rhythmic track, and it needs that drive and it needs that accuracy. So that was quite a challenge for me in that track actually.
Definitely. So, speaking of challenges, what were some of the more difficult things you had to deal with when creating the album, from like the programming perspective or the real life perspective?
I mean, I guess producing such a range of styles was a big challenge. I mean, initially I couldn't go near any of the orchestral stuff because I didn't really have the kit for it. So over the course of making the album, I got hold of some stuff that helped me to produce some more of those orchestral sounds and a slightly more realistic sounding violins and trumpets, things like that. So I suppose that was a challenge from a point of view. I guess the biggest challenge has been on a very boring logistical level, thinking about the ways in which putting inspired sources on there can be a little bit difficult. I did talk to a lot of developers, a lot of composers about their work. Obviously, I was really keen not to step on anyone's toes. This was never about trying to copy what other people have done. It's about shining a light up to the good work that happens. It's about supporting both charity but also the industry. So I had to tread quite carefully around that, and I've got to say the majority of developers I talked to, the majority of composers I talked to were absolutely amazing about the whole thing, and really, really pleased to be mentioned, really, really pleased to have their work sort of cited and to know that their work was that inspirational. So on the whole, that was a really, really positive experience.
Definitely. So the next one I wanted to talk about, 100 million yen. I found it was a very interesting style for the game that it's inspired by.
Yeah, this was a super interesting one because this is the first one I ever did. This was really right back when I decided I wanted to even try video games music, and I downloaded, if you've ever played Payday 2, by the way, probably one of my, and I'm going to say it's probably one of my favourite games of all time, and I have a lot of favourite games. It's an amazing, amazing game, but it's all about this tension, it's all about this stress and this pressure the whole time, and that's kind of what keeps you driving throughout these really tense levels. And Simon Viklund, who's one of my personal idols in this field, after all the good work he's done, wrote the soundtrack to this, and I bought a copy of the game on Steam. It came down with the album, and I was listening to that in my car one day, and I just thought, this is the most amazing music, and without that the game would be lost. And I think the music's done pretty well critically for Simon Viklund in that game as well. But I remember reading an interview with him because I got quite interested in his music, and it was talking about the equipment he uses and what he does, and a lot of the stuff that he was using was the same stuff I had, and I remember thinking, well, hey, if Simon Viklund can do something, maybe I can produce something, maybe a quarter as good, maybe even a third as good as what he's done. And that's kind of what started it all. So I made this track, which is in the style of the tracks on the album. It's got these kind of three sections. It's got a very quiet section at the beginning when you're kind of sneaking. It's got the middle, oh, I've been spotted section, and then the last section, which is a bit more chaotic. So it's quite a long track compared to a lot of the other ones on here. But it's a really, really good track for me. I sent it off to the developers as well as to Overkill, who developed the game, and to Simon, and they really liked it, and they put it up on their Steam page, and it got thousands of hits on SoundCloud, and I was absolutely flattered by how many people from the Payday 2 community were really into this song and who really liked it. And that was the first song where I made it, and I thought, you know what, I could actually try and do this. I could look at some other video games and see which other video games tracks that have really inspired me I might be able to pick up on and might be able to do something with, and that's when I started contacting people. So that's a really, really special track in my heart, because it is really the very linchpin of the whole album.
And on those words, here is 100 million yen. That is definitely one of my favorite tracks on this album, and I have a lot of favorite tracks on this album. One of the interesting things you said last question was, without the music, the game would be lost, which I think is something that is true for so many games, and it's such an underrated part of the gaming experience is the music and the sound.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that, again, right at the beginning of this, I started blogging as well for a little while in between. I wrote an article on that as well, but it's the video games music is a really interesting one because it's got this massive variety and scope and such a huge amount of talent behind it, but it just doesn't seem to get the same kind of recognition as, say, the film music industry, for example. And I don't think the work that goes on in games is any easier at all. But I think there's a bit of a misconception as well amongst both gamers and non-gamers of the kind of music that goes on within the industry. I mean, for example, I told a long time ago, I told Mum, good old Mum, what I was doing. I was producing this album of video games music, and she looked a bit dismayed, and she was like, "Oh, isn't that all just sort of bleeps and bloops?" And I was like, "Well, no, it isn't. It's orchestral music, it's jazz music, it's rock, it's got some chiptune in there, sure, but it's got all these different styles of music that's every bit as valid as the pop music industry as well, or any other music industry. And in some ways, I think video game music developers are even more talented than standard developers in some ways, or composers, because they have to hit such a massive variety of moods, of feelings. They have to create very, very short bits of music for certain bits of games. They have to create really, really long bits, which are more like soundscapes. I mean, it's a massive variety of stuff. So I really do think it's an industry which doesn't get enough attention, and it's really good to see. Recently there's been this big story, hasn't there, about lots of big composers getting into the classic FM Hall of Fame, things like that. It's really nice to see some of this music start to be recognised a little bit more for what it is, but maybe eventually we'll start seeing some jazz tracks recognised by some jazz radio stations, or some electronic music from games being recognised up there with some of the club classics, and there's no reason why that can't happen. I think it's just a question of people's perception of the industry needing to change a little bit, needing to mature a little bit with the industry, perhaps.
I can definitely agree with that. And there's so many examples nowadays, because as a video game music composer, you have a specific job in the development process, in that you have to bring out the emotions of like the brevity of what's happening in the game. Examples like Bastion's a great example, Fez is a great example, or even Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery.
That's a really good one.
And without that music, without that the feeling and the emotions that the music can really bring to you, I think most of that game, like you said, would be lost.
Well, that's it. And these worlds are created when if you close your eyes, you can still, if you close your eyes to the Fez soundtrack, you still feel like you're in that place. As I said before, without that music, then the meaning of the game is lost. I mean, if you ever tried playing some of your favorite games with the sound off, you wouldn't do it if you can avoid it, because you feel like you're missing something, you're lacking something. And it's not just the sound effects, but it's also this music and this atmosphere which needs to be created in some games, especially ones where you're trying to almost escape from reality and you want to be taken to these different places. It's actually a very difficult job, I think, for composers, creating those environments really through sound alone. It's a hell of a challenge for them to achieve, really.
Definitely. The next one I wanted to touch on is one of my favorite games. One of yours too, I'm sure, is Hotline Miami. Simply because it was so dark, but the way that it was presented was trying to be like Vice City. It's right in the 80s, so it needs the music behind it and kind of to build that setting. So, did that influence you when you were doing Pixel Gun?
I mean, the thing about Hotline Miami soundtrack that I liked, first of all, it's another one of those games where you need that pressure behind you to keep going. And the music, if you notice in the game, is very, very repetitive, and I think that's very, very purposefully so. And it just means, every time you die, you just go back to the beginning, you carry on. You die, you go back to the beginning. There's no kind of break in it. It's just this constant action that keeps going. So the music equally is, you talk about some very, very long tracks, very, very solid beats going all the way through. It doesn't really let up or stop. And that's what I was trying to do with Pixel Guns, to create this kind of quite relentless, almost quite brash and aggressive kind of tones to just keep going and going and going and going. And my favourite song on the Hotline Miami album is and it's either called Hydrogen by, I think it's Hydrogen by Moon, or Moon, and that's an amazing song. And you'll hear the kind of the beeps at the top of this, the actual, what I call the Pixel Gun itself at the top, is kind of inspired by that track in particular. And that's, again, something that I really recommend you go and listen to, because that's one of the greatest tracks on that album, and it's again one of those tracks that really keeps you going, keeps you moving, and yeah, that's the story of Pixel Gun, really.
So this is Pixel Gun, which was inspired by Hotline Miami. Another amazing track, honestly.
Why, thank you.
And like you said, you're catching that it's repetitive, but it's not. How could you say that? It's not like boring or anything. It catches that you die, you go back to the beginning. You just keep going through, and pushing yourself through it.
Yeah, that was the idea. I was trying to make it quite, yeah, like I said, like repetitive, but as you say, not boring and quite relentless. I mean, that was probably my fiance's least favorite track. She'd tell you, because she just heard, all she could hear, of course, from outside the room with me with my headphones on, is those beeps coming out incessantly. So it's driving her mad slowly. So yeah, apologies for that again.
One question that I have heard asked of so many musicians that I'd love your input on is about how long do you normally take to make a track, like one single track?
I mean, it varies massively. Like I said to you before, Spell Sword is a good example of a track that didn't take me so long. Not because it was easy to make, but because it's a very simple song, and it doesn't really have many layers, because I wanted it to be quite thin and quite retro in that way. You know, I think the thicker you make a song, the sort of almost the more modern it can sound, the more processed it can sound. I wanted that to be quite raw. It varies massively, and also there were a lot of songs, like Pixel Gun is a really good example of a song. As one of the first songs I made, next to 100 Million Yen. And it went through several iterations. You know, I got to a point where my Cubase messed up, so the beep went wrong, and it just, like, the actual pixel gun just sounded a little bit wrong. It sounded a bit too tinny. It took me forever to get that right again. I nearly scrapped the whole song. So that was like a number of months that went through, just rolling on, changing it, listening to it, not liking it. I eventually found that really nice little chippy kind of octave beep, and it was kind of in your left ear, which really just kicked it off for me. So I eventually decided to put it back on, and glad I did. But then equal time, that Spell Sword took me about 4 days probably by the time I'd EQ'd it, looked at it, and processed it, mastered it, mixed it. So, and that is a relatively short time for one of these songs. So it does vary, and it depends on the quality you want out of it as well. I mean, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I do tend to go back and tweak and tweak and tweak and improve and tweak, and then make it worse, and then tweak it again, and then improve it, and then make it worse again. So it can be quite a long process in itself. Yeah.
I have seen personally too, like, just, you say it varies depending on which song or which style, that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally.
I know one producer who he was producing an industrial album with a band, and one track usually ran about 600 actual tracks in the song. But then you look at somebody like Jack White that produced an entire album on a 4-track.
Yeah. And it depends entirely on the kind of song, the type of style. And for a lot of those songs, you know, having 16, 17, 20, 600 different tracks wouldn't make sense for the style either.
Yeah, exactly. So we have time for about 2 more tracks, and I already know which ones they are. So Metal Demon in chat is asking us to play Blast Radius.
Yeah, I can see that.
So would you mind telling us a little bit about Blast Radius?
So I've got to confess, actually, Blast Radius wasn't originally meant to be one of these tracks. This was meant to be a bit of light relief for me, and I thought, you know, I've been spending a lot of time making video games tracks. I think maybe I'll give some kind of dance music a go, and I thought, you know, I'd just try that just for because I thought, you know, how hard can it be to make a dance track? Quite hard, as it turns out. But so I started making this, and it's quite 90s to begin with. It had that really 90s bass line, really 90s drums, and then before I knew where I was adding in these synths and these, you know, doing the same stuff I've been doing with all the other tracks, and it just started to form this kind of really retro shoot 'em up kind of image in my head. And it really wasn't something that I set out to make originally. It wasn't like I had this idea in my head and I thought, how am I going to go about making it? It kind of evolved into it. So I almost kind of tripped over this. It wasn't really intentional, but it turned out, just, I don't really know how, it ended up being one of the most balanced songs on the album in terms of the mixing. And so it then became kind of my benchmark for some of the other ones in terms of, you know, how loud should the bass be, what frequency should the bass be hitting, you know, how much do I need to sidechain the bass drum, things like that. And it became quite technically a bit of a model for the rest. So it was quite a happy accident, really.
Yeah, so here is the happy evolving accident, Blast Radius, which is inspired by retro shoot 'em ups. I can totally see what you mean. That was like a very, very well balanced track.
Yeah, I don't really know how it came about. You know, sometimes you'll know this as a technician, but sometimes you just make these tracks and it just sounds quite good somehow, like balance wise. It just sounds good. And producing that balance of the bass and the treble and getting it all sounding right and compressed right can take just absolutely ages. And that's some of the stuff that's taken me the longest. I mean, recording these tracks doesn't take half as long as editing them and fiddling with them and mastering them and all that stuff. It just
Yes.
takes so much longer. Yeah.
And that is true for any part of the audio industry. So, we have time for one more track, and much like you have, I have saved the best for last, in my opinion. I wanted to talk about The Brightest Light, which is inspired by fantasy RPGs. It immediately made me think about, I don't know how many people know this, but when you beat the original storyline in Guild Wars 2, there is a song that plays at the end that is very nice. It's orchestral, has nice vocals, that kind of thing. And I was just wondering which games actually inspired The Brightest Light.
Well, I mean, the main games that inspired it in broad terms was Final Fantasy was the main game that inspired it, and I don't put that on there because I can't. But
Yeah.
Final Fantasy was a game was a game that meant a lot to me in terms of my history, in terms of my past, and it was a big inspiration for that. And there's a lot of other RPGs too. But the weird thing about this song is, although I kind of made it in the RPG vein, and a large part of putting this on there in the first place was to create a sense of balance. You know, I really didn't want this to be an album of just chiptune songs because as much as I love those albums, I really wanted this to be about variety, and I wanted it to be able to show the different corners of the industry. And there's a lot of great work that goes on in chiptune, but it's not the only side of gaming music, and I think that's the side that people tend to associate with the most and think of the most. But the weird thing about this track is, having made it in the RPG vein, the scene that actually comes to my mind when I listen to it now and when I think of it is actually the Stanley Parable again, and there's already a Stanley Parable track on here, and I don't know if you've ever played the Stanley Parable, and this might be a spoiler alert for the Stanley Parable, so I've warned you, but you do have the option to escape this facility you're in, and there's a bit at the end where you push a button and very slowly you see this line of light creeping down as this massive great big door opens, and it's a very, very slow and very kind of emotional process. And this kind of makes me think of that, and that's actually where the name The Brightest Light came from in the end for me, was the idea of, you've been in this dark place and kind of a bit oppressed and a bit trapped, and then there's this light begins to open up towards the outside world, and so although that has nothing to do with RPGs, that was kind of the vein in which it was inspired originally, but it's come to me to mean something a little bit different visually, and when I think of it in my head, so it's an interesting one.
Interesting. This is The Brightest Light. Absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. So, that is the NotAGame Collection. That's not everything. To hear everything, you guys have a choice of either supporting the album right now, which you should anyway. We also are going to be playing it tonight in about 4 hours' time. We're going to be playing the album through in its entirety. But I wanted to ask, what's on the horizon?
I don't know. I mean, to some degree, it depends on the reception to this. I mean, obviously, if it's something people want more of, then I'd love to make more songs like this. You know, I'd love to make to try and expand my collection. But I've already got my eye on a few games that I need to get in touch with some people about. Gunpoint in particular. I don't know if you ever played Gunpoint.
Oh my god, I
That's
love
got
Gunpoint.
an amazing soundtrack. This film noir thing going on, which again is this whole style I've never tried. Which I get really excited about trying styles I've never tried before. And I learned so much through doing it. So yeah, I'd totally love to do another NotAGame collection, or even to just add to the one I've got, you know, and add tracks on, or release it as a smaller EP, or I don't know really. You know, it's something I'd like to keep doing, and hopefully people like the music enough to want to support it, and to want to support me in doing it. And yeah, reception so far and response so far from people has been overwhelming, and it's great to hear from you guys. So thanks very much for that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Remember, everybody, this is Simon David's album of the NotAGame Collection, which is all of his tracks. Very high quality album. And the proceeds are going towards, or in support of the Child's Play Foundation. So make sure to click that link that I just put in chat if you're interested in buying this album. We'll also be playing it later on. And for those watching on YouTube, obviously the link is going to be in the description. I'm sure you guys have already checked it out. That is about going to do it up for us, though. So thank you so much, Simon, for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks. It's been fantastic being on here. Thanks.
Yeah, it's been a great little conversation that we had.
Definitely. And I think Vinny said he might post up as well when it's going to go live soon, hopefully on iTunes. So it's going to go live on a few other sites as well as Bandcamp. So if that's somewhere that you'd rather buy it on iTunes or Google Play, I'm trying to cover you guys and get it out as many ways as possible. So hopefully I can get that message out to you when that's all ready to go.
Definitely. Okay, so that's going to be it for us here. I'm going to play the intro again because I love that intro.
Cheers.
All right, so until then, guys, much love, and we will see you soon.
The video games industry is one of the most innovative and fastest growing industries in the world. The men and women of this industry work tirelessly to provide entertainment for the masses, and some of these provide the music. Music that we love. Music that we listen to when we're enjoying ourselves playing those video games. Video games. Music that we love. Music that we listen to when we're enjoying ourselves listening to video games. Video games. Do we even know who these people are? No. Would video games be the same without them? No. What you are about to hear are not real songs, but they are inspired by songs from video games. Video games. They are not covers of the songs themselves, but are together a testament to the variety and quality of this glorious industry. Let's not let this industry die. No, let's keep it alive by celebrating the music that we love the most. And let's go even further, by supporting others with the money we raise through our love of the music. Listen, enjoy, give, support.